Hey everybody, Who's Your Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm talking episode 1 of The Flash. This is the newest show to join my roster of reviews, so I'm going to be reviewing the entire season, and I think I'm going to be having a grand old time with that. As you can see, I do like me The Flash. And going by this episode alone, I think this is going to be a real fun ride. Now, it should be noted that this story, basically kind of what they're doing with the Flash now, this interpretation of Barry Allen is heavily influenced by a miniseries from the comics from a couple of years ago called Flash Rebirth. And it was written by Jeff Johns, who is one of the people behind the show. And a guy with very good credit as a writer of the Flash, and just a writer in general. In my book, Jeff Johns is really one of the best guys out there in comics right now. So, and of course we have David Nutter doing the pilot, and Mark Guggenheim, a producer who's also one of the people behind Arrow, is in on this. So the credentials of the people behind the scenes are really good. I've got no complaints about any of the actors. Basically, this is just going to be a big fat geek off about how awesome this episode is. I'll be up front with you guys. I saw very few problems with this episode. But anyway, let's kind of just get right into it. Now, we've already been introduced to Grant Gustin as Barry Allen, and I kind of got a read on his character, and even saw in the episode of Three Ghosts of Arrow him getting his superpower, him getting struck by the lightning that gave him his powers. Now, they do kind of flesh things out here. But what I really like about Barry is that upon discovering his powers, he has those moments of, hey, what's going on? And how do I control this? But once he's got that down, and of course this is the Flash, so he does that rather quickly, his immediate thing is, I want to use these powers to help people. And that's really great. There is no angst in this. Well, okay, I guess that's not entirely true. Obviously there's some angst going on, but he isn't doing this to go out there and get revenge or something like that. Him having these superpowers isn't, kind of in his mind, a means to an end to solving his mother's murder. Barry is just simply a good guy who has been given a gift, and he wants to use that gift to help others. And the way people like to do these superhero things these days is they really do want to focus on the grim and gritty, grounded in the real world thing. And there's nothing intrinsically wrong with that. Excuse me. But one of the things that I kind of observed, and I know I'm not the only one about, say, for example, the Christopher Nolan Batman movies, is at times they seem to be embarrassed that they were a Batman movie. I mean, yes, there's nothing wrong with taking a more realistic look at Batman, putting things down on a more grounded level, but at the end of the day, Batman is also about a guy who runs around a modern American city fighting crime and dressed as a giant bat. And the movies at times seem to embarrassed by this idea. It's like, look, this is a comic book movie. It's fine to tone things down, to keep things a little bit more realistic, because the full craziness and goofiness and fun, and of course that's the main reason why people read comics, is not always something that's going to go over with everybody in general. You do kind of have to aim for the middle, and that's fine. But what's really great about this show is that it embraces it. It embraces that it's a comic book show, the way Arrow really did, particularly in season 2. Like when the villains started picking up nicknames. Now, granted, they were mostly things that were slapped on them by the media, but I love Felicity, quoting to Oliver about how you've defeated Count Vertigo and Clock King and all this other stuff. Even though, just like he was like, yeah, you beat Mike and Dave. I mean, it's just kind of like that. And again, I like how the Flash is just really unapologetic about this. And the people behind the show have even said, we basically think this is the most comic book show that has ever been made. Now, a lot of it, of course, does depend on the era. Like, for example, the 60s Batman show, which for basically many better part of 20 years really kind of defined of what people thought of when they thought of, well, live-action superheroes and comic books in general. And that was certainly a very, honestly, very reasonable take on the more goofy comic books of the Batman comics of the 60s. Now, this is a more take, but this is focused on the more modern comic books that certainly don't shy away from the fact that you can have things like, armies of talking cybernetic gorillas rampaging around a city trying to, as part of their scheme to take over the world. But you can have that goofiness and the craziness, and then you can also have the genuine emotion, the drama, the soap opera of it all, if you will. And that's really what keeps people coming back in a lot of ways. The mixture between the fantastic and the mundane. That's where the real gold of comic books comes in. But anyway, overall, and one of the great things about Barry Allen as a character is that he's always been portrayed as being a very moral person, somebody who just, when the superhero thing happened to him, they just stepped in and did it because it was the right thing to do. And again, that's sort of staying very true to the comics, and that's great. Now, giving him the motivation of, my mother was murdered, my father was sent to prison, again, straight out of Flash Rebirth. I have that book, I own it, and there's a lot I could say about it, but I don't want to spoil things. But the people have said, behind the show, have also said, we have changed up some things, so even if you know the comics, and even if you know Flash Rebirth, and they've been very upfront that a lot of this show is based on that story, we're still going to throw some curveballs at you. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more later. But one thing that I did see people kind of criticizing about Barry is they didn't like when he goes to the scene and he's checking things out, and you see those little pop-ups, and that's obviously very reminiscent of Sherlock. It's like, come on, Sherlock is one of the most popular shows out there. I mean, whenever a new batch of seasons comes out, people go absolutely freaking nuts for 3 weeks. Is it really so much of a surprise that they would, take an element of that show and put it in here, given that Barry and Sherlock do have genuine similarities? No. We're just going to have to adjust to the fact that things like, those little pop-ups when somebody does these Sherlock scans, as TV tropes put it, is probably just going to become a standard thing from now on. And I don't really see a problem with that. I mean, seriously, it's like 30 seconds of the episode. And seriously, I mean, I just don't really understand people getting upset over that. Excuse me. Oh, jeez. Sorry. Okay. So getting back to that, anything else? No, that's the main thing. Since we've already been introduced to Barry, a lot of the other time is spent kind of building the world and the people around him. I mean, not that they don't do a reasonably good job of giving us an idea of who Barry is, but having seen him on The Flash, I already know. So kind of talking about him too much as a character sort of feels like treading over old ground. So let's just move on and talk about some of the other people. Now, after his so Barry's father is played by John Wesley Shipp, who, as people probably know, was on the live-action Flash show back in the early 90s. And if you've ever seen any of that show, that was a show that embraced the wholeheartedly that it was a comic book show. It had the character people running around like supervillains in full-on costume. I mean, seriously, you have to see some of the footage of Mark Hamill as the Trickster. It is just something you have to see. And of course, Wesley Shipp was brought in to do the voice of Reverse Flash in some of the recent animated stuff. I think it was over on like Beware the Batman or something. I don't know. But Shipp is a guy who has been long associated with the Flash, and holds a real special place in the hearts of longtime fans of the Flash. And when they were casting casting the show, a lot of people were like, just like, get Ship as Barry's dad, get Ship as Barry's dad, get Ship as Barry's dad, and then they got Ship as Barry's dad, and people went nuts. And I love this. I love those situations where the people behind the show really listen to the fans. And just that scene in the prison between Barry and his dad, where he like says like, "Dad, I've got it. I am gonna get you out of here." And they put their hands on the glass, and his father's like, and he says, "I am so proud to be your son." It's just like, yeah, yeah. It's nice to see somebody on a superhero who has these nice family relationships, who has a parent who's alive and has they have a good relationship with. I mean, granted, his dad's been in jail for 14 years, but Barry is a guy who just does not give up, and that's one of the really great things about him. Now, he's also got his surrogate dad, who's played by Jesse L. Martin, who, for of course years and years, was Joe Green over on Law and Order. I was really thrilled when they cast him as well. He was my second favorite Law and Order character for a long time, with of course Lenny Briscoe being my favorite. I mean, the only really bad thing I can say about them casting Jesse Martin on the show was that apparently they passed over Ernie Hudson for the role, and I am a lifelong Ghostbusters fan, so I'm always thrilled when I get to see Ernie Hudson in a movie or on TV. I actually got to meet him when he was at a convention in Chicago, and I'm pretty sure I geeked out to an absolutely embarrassing level the entire time I was talking to him. But I still have his autographed picture up in my bedroom. So yeah, love Ernie Hudson, love Ghostbusters. But yeah, Jesse Martin as Barry's dad, who I just love looking at Jesse Martin is like, dude, have you aged at all in like the past 15 years? You look almost exactly like you did when you were still on Law and Order. But anyway, him as Barry's surrogate dad is really cool. He does have that moment where he's like yelling at Barry about, like, Barry, basically get your head out of your ass and stop believing all this ridiculous nonsense. And that does kind of make him seem like a dick. But keep in mind, the idea of people with superpowers running around this world is at that point in the minds of pretty much everybody who isn't a friend of Oliver Queen or an enemy of Oliver Queen, is basically craziness. And he's saying this to Barry out of love, because he sees that Barry is a very talented guy who would have a genuinely good and strong career in the police department if he would just get his act together. And this whole thing about this is basically kind of like Barry showing up and it's like starting to rant about UFOs as far as he's concerned. It's like, Barry, get it together. But we've also seen that Joe is a guy who, like, he specifically forbade his daughter from becoming a cop simply because, he's like, look, this is dangerous. This is not really the life that I want for you. So we can see that Joe is a good guy, but he can kind of be a bit of a dick when it comes to his kids. Barry basically he's the one that took Barry in after his mother died and his father was sent to prison. And so he's basically Barry's surrogate father. But again, Joe, you can see that Joe has really served as a role model for Barry. He's probably the reason why, in addition to his mother's murder and wanting to free his father, that he decided to go into police work. I mean, without that, for all we know, Barry could have just sort of ended up out there in some kind of a crazy shack or something, doing God only knows what, trying to solve his mother's murder. But we also see that he's a brave guy. He has no problem standing up to Clyde, even in the face of superpowers, and having seen yet another one of his partners get shot by the Marone brothers. And incidentally, one of the cops that was killed, Carlisle or something like that, was a character from the comics who was actually an ally of the Flash. But anyway, I also really love that at the end of the episode, Joe is in on the secret. And this is, again, another one of those things that a lot of other shows may have dragged out for years, or at least maybe until the end of the season. Here, they give it to us at the end of episode 1, and we're like, oh, I didn't expect that. Well, what's going to happen now? It's like if Aunt May had found out on day 1 that Peter Parker was Spider-Man. Not a huge amount to say about Iris right now. The idea that, the guy who's basically kind of been raised as her brother has the hots for her, it's sort of understandable why she's not picking up on that. And, of course, we find out after the time skip that she's dating Eddie Thawne against her father's wishes. And you have to be listening, but she's apparently studying, was it criminal psychology or something like that? Well, basically, she's kind of involved in the law enforcement field, but not the kind of person who gets to wear a badge. And no complaints really about Iris. It's just she hasn't really stood on her own as a character. She's really just kind of been defined by the 3 guys around her, and hasn't really had the chance to step up and do much on her own. But again, it's the pilot episode, and this episode is really all about Barry and getting him out there working as the Flash. So her taking a back seat for the moment is pretty understandable. Since I brought him up, let's talk briefly about Eddie Thawne. Now, I like how they mentioned that he was a transfer from Keystone. Basically, Central City has kind of a Minneapolis-St. Paul thing going on with a city called Keystone City. In fact, if you are really careful, if you know the comics really well, it's actually even been stated that Keystone City is in Kansas and that Central City is in Missouri. And I guess that river that you see in the middle there is supposed to be the Mississippi. Speaking of geography, did you notice how Oliver mentioned that that Starling City is 600 miles from Central City, which just kind of go with what some of the Arrow writers have said they're in their minds that Starling City is meant to be located somewhere in California. Of course, if it's 600 miles, if Iron Heights Prison, where Barry's dad is locked up, is 600 miles away from Central City, why is his dad in a prison so far away? I mean, I assume it's like some big time level federal prison, but that's not really the sort of place where guys who kill their wives get sent. But I guess that's one of those things you just probably shouldn't think about too much. But anyway, so Eddie Thawne. Well, a lot of people who know the comics suspect Eddie might not exactly be who he says he is. I do want to talk about it, but I don't want to spoil it too much. Yeah, I have a feeling that Eddie might turn out to be a bit of a red herring. We'll get to why in a bit. So let's talk about the Star Labs people. Now, Cisco Ramon and Caitlin Snow we've met in their guest appearance over on Arrow. And we got a pretty decent read on their characters there. Cisco's the goofy, sort of enthusiastic, nerdy dude, and Caitlin is the much more grounded, not exactly a people person kind of person. And this episode, let's talk about Caitlin first. Actually, she even says when Barry mentions her, "You don't really smile much," and she says, "Well, my life's work has been ruined, and my fiance was killed in that explosion." And then you kind of look at how she was when she guest starred on Arrow, which is obviously when her fiance would have still been alive, and she really wasn't that different. So I think we just kind of have to assume that she's probably maybe just a little bit of a naturally grumpy person. But it was cool that at the end, after Barry had gone and saved the day, and yeah, I'm okay, that she was just as pumped and happy as Cisco was. Now, of course, in the comics, Caitlin Snow is one of the people, along with Louise Lincoln, who became the villain called Killer Frost. Obviously, having ice-based powers. But I was reading with the interview with the creators who said, don't assume that characters like Caitlin and Cisco are exactly going to follow the path they did in the comics. it kind of leads me to think that maybe Caitlin might stay one of the good guys, and they would, if they do decide to bring in Killer Frost, it might be Louise Lincoln who becomes her, and I'd be okay with that because again, one of those things of, oh, her last name is Snow and she gains ice powers. Oh, what a coincidence! And again, that's one of the things that's just that's how it works in comics sometimes. Now in the comics, oh yeah, and of course, it's established. Well, you know what? We'll save to talk about who her fiance is for a later time because, hint hint, that's going to become relevant. Now Cisco, in the his counterpart in the comics is a superhero called Vibe, who was. It's kind of sad to say that he was actually one of the first prominent Hispanic superheroes. The thing is, though, he was created back in the 80s, and his thing is that he was and I kid you not, basically a super-powered break dancer. And if you're irritatingly young, from my perspective, breakdancing is what they called b-boying back in the 80s. But I will never call it that because that's stupid. It's breakdancing. Because, I remember stuff from the 80s. Shut up, you young whippersnappers. Anyway, over the years they did, and I think it might have even been Jeff Johns who sort of dusted Vibe off and kind of reinvented him as somebody who was honestly just not ridiculous and borderline offensive to Hispanic people, because that's kind of what tends to happen when middle-aged white guys try and create characters who are minorities. Sometimes they do just fine, and other times it's like, really? But anyway, these days, Vibe, the new reinvented version of the character, did even have his own series. It was rather short-lived, but the reinterpretation of the character was pretty well received by fans. A lot of people saying, wow, I never thought I would actually like Vibe as a character. Now, I'm not super familiar with Vibe's incarnation in the comics, but I do like Cisco. He's very much somebody who's cut from the same cloth as Barry and Felicity. And people have even kind of called him he's like the bro version of Felicity. And, having another guy his own age that Barry is very similar to, I think would really be a good thing for him. So I'm definitely looking forward to more Cisco. And let's see here. Now we come to the big cake, and that's, of course, Harrison Wells. And let's just cut to the chase, to the big thing at the end where we find out, oh my god, not only can he walk, but he's apparently a time traveler. Well, as has been pointed out online, Harrison Wells, H. Wells, H.G. Wells, author of The Time Machine. So, and then of course there's that newspaper from the future that he calls up. 10 years in the future, the Flash is supposed to disappear in a crisis that involves red sky, big red skies going on. Now, if you're a fan of the comics, this immediately jumps to your mind, especially because of the word crisis. Crisis on Infinite Earths. If you don't know comics, Crisis on Infinite Earths was a major story that ran through DC Comics back in 1986. And long story short, it is essentially one of the most famous storylines in all of comics. And one of the big climaxes of that story was Barry Allen sacrificing his life to save the universe. It is in the history of superhero comics one of the most famous superhero deaths. It's like right up there with Jean Grey as dying as Dark Phoenix and all that other stuff. And unlike a lot of things in comics, apart from a few time travel stories, Barry's death stuck for like 25 years or so, give or take. And it paved the way for, his sidekick, Wally West. West? Interesting surname there, eh? To take over as the Flash. It was really the first time a sidekick had got the full-on promotion to becoming the hero that they had studied under. And Wally was the Flash for years and years and years. I mean, I came into the Flash with Wally as my Flash, kind of the way Kyle Rayner was my Green Lantern. But anyway, yeah, so basically the idea that in a live-action show, in any way, shape, or form, that Crisis on Infinite Earths would be invoked is just like, no way. If you are a comic book fan, I literally was just like, oh, I literally just could not believe what I was seeing when I saw that. So, I mean, right there is everything you could ever want to know about just how wholeheartedly they're embracing that this is a superhero show. Also, as many people have noted, if you notice, the other headline mentioned that a merger between Queen Industries and Wayne Tech had gone through. Now, no, the show is not set in the same universe as Gotham or The Dark Knight. Please, people of the internet, stop asking that, because it makes me hate you and wish I could strangle you through my computer screen, because Gotham is on Fox and The Flash and Arrow are on the CW. And the Nolan movies, they haven't made one of those for several years. And, okay, it's not the same universe. The people that make the shows have said this. Stop being stupid, internet. Oh god, I just asked people on the internet to stop being stupid. I might as well ask the ocean to stop being wet. Sorry, yesterday was kind of a bad day for me, and I'm still kind of getting over it. But anyway. Also noted by people that Barry's costume is not exactly like it is in the comics. Like, particularly the chest logo is darker. But if you pay very careful attention to that photo of the Flash in the newspaper, his chest logo is much more like this, indicating, of course, that over the next 10 years, Barry's costume will continue to evolve and move in a direction more in keeping with the comics. Now, getting back to Harrison Wells, I'm kind of wondering if he is well, it kind of goes back to, you know, Eddie Thawne possibly being a red herring, and well, the identity of just who the yellow man in the blur that killed Barry's mom is. Well, folks, if you don't know the Flash, let me put it to you this way. The Flash's arch enemy is a guy who got called the Reverse Flash, who has also been called Zoom and Professor Zoom. And his real name is Eobard Thawne. Not Edward, Eobard. And he's a time traveler from the future. Now, granted, there was another guy who also used the Zoom name called Hunter Zolomon, but I think that we're going to be dealing with the more classic interpretation of the character here. So, if you think the word professor, which guy jumps more to mind? Eddie Thawne or Harrison Wells? It's also possible that if Wells is a villain, there's some other time-traveling bad guys like Kronos and Epoch, who are certainly possibilities on the table. And this all turned out to be a big fake out. He could actually turn out to be good. But you have to wonder, how did Harrison Wells even realize that Wally wasn't flatlining? And did you notice that when Wally just did that enormous burst of superhuman speed, Caitlin and Cisco about crapped themselves, and Harrison took it all in kind of stride. I mean, of course, he obviously knew who Barry was, but Anyway, speaking of bad guys, a bad guy this time around is Clyde Mardon, and he has the powers of Flash's longtime enemy, Weather Wizard. Now, it looks like Clyde was shot and killed at the end of this episode, but remember, they said that Clyde fought Rob Banks with his brother Mark, who was also on that plane. Now, think about it. As brothers, they would have very similar genetic structures, and they were caught up in the same event. So I'm kind of wondering if Clyde isn't dead and it's not going to be Mark who doesn't show up at some point later in the future, looking for revenge over the death of his brother. It doesn't seem like Clyde knew that Mark was alive, but it could have just been for whatever reason, Mark was out of commission or something. I don't know. I probably have to go back and rewatch that scene again. But again, that's just an idea I'm going to throw out there for you. Anyway, guys, I've been talking about this for half an hour, so I think I should wrap this up. All in all, Flash is great stuff. This is everything that I hope this show could be. There's really not a whole lot of going on in terms of flaws here. And I think this is going to be, as they said, the most comic book show that's ever been, and this is going to win a lot of fans. Oh god, I almost forgot to talk about the crossover with Arrow. And yeah, we get to see Oliver Queen, we get to see him and Barry having that conversation, and it is awesome on so many levels. And I just love how at the end they both kind of react to each other and say, "Cool." And just kind of hinting that Ollie and Barry are, well, obviously that we're going to have some crossover between Arrow and Flash this season, as if you've been paying attention to the behind the scenes news that's been coming out, that's going to happen. But just the fact that we're probably looking at what is going to be the core of this universe's version of the Justice League. And somebody out there even made a really cool little chart of all the people who have been introduced or are going to be introduced over the course of the coming seasons of Arrow and Flash, who are in fact members of the Justice League, or a team related to the Justice League called the Justice Society, and it's a pretty damn long list. So yeah, guys, this is going to be a fun one. Anyway, as always, please comment, rate, and subscribe, and of course you can follow me on Twitter at Who's Your Jedi. Until next time, take care and have a good one.